The glass of grape juice cut through the air like a weapon, its purple contents spilling in a perfect arc before crashing against the crisp white of my dress. In an instant, the fabric that had cost me nearly a week's wages was ruined, stained in a blotch so dark it looked like fresh blood. The entire room went silent, just for a second, the kind of silence where you can hear the thudding of your own heartbeat before it all erupted into laughter. Emily Caldwell, my 8-year-old granddaughter, stood there clutching the empty glass with a grin far too knowing for a child her age. She looked me square in the eye, daring me to react. "Mommy said you don't belong here," she murmured in a voice dripping with false innocence. Her words sliced through me sharper than any blade, echoing in my ears like church bells on a Sunday morning, relentless and impossible to ignore. The laughter grew louder. Vanessa Hayes Caldwell, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had never hidden her disdain for me, was doubled over in delight. "Emily, you are terrible," she shrieked between gasps of laughter, but there wasn't a trace of reprimand in her voice. No, she was proud. Proud that her child had just humiliated me in front of a living room full of guests. My son, David Caldwell Jr., covered his mouth as if he wanted to hide his amusement, but his eyes betrayed him. They glittered with enjoyment. Around them, their friends whispered, pointing at my ruined dress, feeding off the spectacle like it was the evening's entertainment. I remained frozen in my chair, the cold grape juice seeping through the thin fabric, sticking to my skin like glue. My hands trembled slightly, but I lifted my chin high. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not now, not in front of all these strangers who would later tell their own households about the pathetic old woman humiliated at a birthday party. "Grandma, aren't you going to say anything?" Emily pressed, her voice sweet to everyone else but venom to my ears. That child had been coached, of that I was certain. Every word, every gesture, every mocking tilt of her head carried the fingerprints of Vanessa's influence. My eyes drifted toward the kitchen, where Vanessa now busied herself slicing more cake, her smirk never fading. She was the director of this little play, and Emily her star performer. I forced a smile, though my lips quivered. "No, sweetheart," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I don't have anything to say." The words tasted like iron on my tongue, bitter but necessary. I rose from the chair with as much dignity as I could muster, the ruined hem of my dress clinging to my legs. I could feel the stares following me, some amused, some pitying, all confirming the truth I had tried so long to deny. They didn't want me there. They never had. I was not family to them. I was an obligation, tolerated for appearance's sake, dismissed the moment I stepped out of sight. As I slipped into the kitchen and grabbed a towel, I could still hear the laughter erupting behind me, the music swelling as if someone had turned the volume up just to bury the sound of my humiliation. I rubbed at the stain, knowing it was futile. No amount of water or soap could erase what had just happened. The dress was ruined, my dignity, once again, trampled. But beneath the sting of shame, something else stirred within me. Something sharp, something cold, something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. At that very moment, as I pressed the damp cloth against the spreading purple stain, I knew with absolute clarity that this was the last time I would ever allow myself to be treated like this. I pressed the towel against the spreading stain, my hands moving automatically while my mind drifted far away. The kitchen light flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. It wasn't just grape juice seeping into the fabric of my dress, it was years of accumulated humiliation, years of pretending not to notice the way they looked at me, laughed at me, dismissed me. That stain wasn't new. It had been there all along, invisible, slowly spreading through every corner of my life. Tonight had only made it visible to everyone else. For as long as I could remember, I had tried to be useful to them, to my son, David Caldwell Jr., and his wife Vanessa. From the very moment Richard, my late husband, died of a heart attack, I thought my family would need me more than ever. And I, in my loneliness, needed them too. The grief had hollowed me out like a dry husk, leaving me desperate to cling to what little I had left. My son, his wife, and my granddaughter Emily. They were supposed to be my reason for living, my anchor in the storm. Instead, they had become the very storm that battered me until I no longer recognized myself. I remembered the first time David asked me for money. It was just 3 weeks after Richard's funeral. The flowers on his grave hadn't even wilted yet when David came to my house with his eyes red and voice trembling. "Mom, I need $5,000. It's temporary. I'll pay you back in 2 months, I promise." His desperation was so convincing that I didn't hesitate. I gave him the money out of Richard's life insurance, the money I had set aside to fix the leaking roof and replace the drafty windows in my old home. 2 months turned into 6, then into a year. When I finally gathered the courage to ask about repayment, David snapped at me, accusing me of being selfish, of putting money above family. That moment should have been my wake-up call. But instead, I drowned in guilt, convincing myself that a good mother helps her child no matter the cost. And so the requests kept coming. $3,000 for credit card debt, $2,000 for a car repair, hundreds here and there for groceries, for rent, for whatever story he could spin that day. Each time he swore it was temporary. Each time I told myself this would be the last. Each time I caved, desperate to believe he still needed me. The worst mistake, though, was co-signing their mortgage. Vanessa had looked me straight in the eye, her voice sugar-sweet, and said, "Martha, it's just a formality. You won't have to pay anything. We just need your name so the bank will approve it." I remember sitting there in the bank office, wearing the same black suit I had worn to Richard's funeral, trying to understand the legal jargon the loan officer rattled off. My son's hand pressed against mine, reassuring, convincing. "Trust us, Mom. This is for our family. Emily needs a home." And so I signed. God help me, I signed. At first, things seemed fine. David had a job with a construction company. Vanessa worked part-time in retail, and they made the payments without issue. I let myself feel proud that I had done something important for them. But then David lost his job, and the phone calls started coming. Calls not to him, but to me. "Miss Caldwell, the mortgage on Elmwood Avenue is 3 months past due. If it isn't brought current immediately, foreclosure proceedings will begin." That's how I learned the truth, not from my son, but from strangers at the bank. I confronted David, and for the first time in his adult life, he yelled at me. "It's not my fault, Mom. Do you think I wanted to lose my job? And now you're pressuring me like I'm some kind of criminal?" Behind him, Vanessa stood silently with Emily in her arms, glaring at me as if I were the problem. I left that day with $8,000 fewer in my savings account because I paid the delinquent balance. I told myself I had no choice. If I didn't, they would lose their home, and my credit would be destroyed. But gratitude never came. David mumbled a half-hearted "thank you" without even looking me in the eye. Vanessa didn't bother at all. They acted as though it was my duty, as though signing those papers had bound me not just legally but morally to their mistakes. And from then on, I became the unofficial backup plan for every missed payment, every financial crisis. I worked nights cleaning offices just to cover what they couldn't. I came home with aching bones and hands raw from chemicals while they remodeled their kitchen with new cabinets I had paid for. They threw a party to show it off to their friends. 30 people laughing and drinking in the kitchen I had sacrificed my health to provide, and never invited me. I only found out through photos on Facebook, photos of Vanessa posing proudly by the granite island, her wine glass raised in triumph. When I asked David why I hadn't been invited, his answer was simple and cruel. "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You don't like crowds." I should have walked away then, but I didn't. I couldn't. I clung to hope, telling myself they were young, that they didn't understand the value of money yet, that one day they would appreciate me. Instead, I sank deeper into the quicksand of their entitlement. Christmases were the worst. I spent hundreds, sometimes $500 or more, on gifts for them, wrapping each one with care, writing heartfelt cards, saving every penny I could from my meager income. In return, they gave me items hastily purchased from discount stores, sometimes re-gifted things they no longer wanted. I still remember the year Vanessa handed me a half-used jar of face cream. "It didn't work for me, Martha, but maybe you'll like it," she said with that fake smile she wore so well. And like the fool I was, I thanked her as if it were the most precious gift in the world. Even Emily, sweet, innocent Emily, had been shaped into a weapon against me. At her school events, I sat in the back row while David and Vanessa claimed the front. I clapped until my hands stung, pride swelling in my chest for my granddaughter. Yet when the time came for family photos, Vanessa would always turn to me with that same plastic grin. "This one's just for the parents, Martha. I'm sure you understand." And so I stood aside, invisible in the background, while they captured their perfect little family portrait without me. I had always told myself it was enough just to be there, just to witness Emily growing up. But tonight, as I stood in the kitchen wiping at the spreading grape juice stain, I realized the truth. I hadn't been there at all. Not really. I had been tolerated, humored, treated as an old piece of furniture too cumbersome to throw away, but too useless to truly value. And in that moment, a terrifying clarity washed over me. They didn't want me. They never had. To them, I was not a mother or grandmother. I was a bank account with legs, a convenient solution to problems they didn't want to solve themselves. My presence was optional, my sacrifices invisible, my love unreciprocated. I dropped the towel onto the counter, my hands shaking, but not from weakness this time. Something inside me had shifted. For decades, I had lived in fear of being alone, fear of admitting that my family didn't truly love me, fear of facing the silence that would follow if I stopped giving. But standing there in that kitchen, drenched in grape juice and humiliation, I felt the fear burning away, replaced by something harder, sharper: determination. That was the word. Pure, cold determination, like ice in December. The kind of determination that makes a woman realize she has endured enough. Tonight was not the first time they had humiliated me, but it would be the last. When I finally walked out of that house, the laughter still echoing behind me, the night air felt sharp against my skin. I gripped my purse with trembling hands, but the trembling wasn't from fear this time. It was from the weight of years pressing down all at once, years that could no longer be ignored. As I sat in the driver's seat and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, I saw someone I barely recognized. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. Her eyes were dry, her jaw set firm. It wasn't despair I saw there, it was something else, a simmering resolve. I drove home through the quiet streets, the city lights blurring against my windshield. My mind replayed every scene, every insult, every rejection that had stacked up over the years like bricks in a wall between me and the family I thought I had. Tonight's humiliation wasn't an isolated event. It was simply the latest chapter in a story that had been written for far too long. I remembered Marcus, my David, at his last birthday. I had scraped together $200. I didn't have to buy him a watch he had once mentioned in passing. I spent hours on buses to reach the jewelry store downtown, standing in lines until my feet swelled, but I told myself it would be worth it. I imagined his smile when he unwrapped it, his gratitude for a gift chosen with care. Instead, when the moment came, he tore through the wrapping, muttered a distracted, "Thanks, Mom," and set the watch aside without a second glance. 10 minutes later, he was parading around in the shirt Vanessa had given him, a shirt that cost half as much, as though it were the crown jewel of his celebration. My watch lay forgotten in a pile of crumpled paper and napkins, forgotten, just like me. Then there was Emily's 7th birthday, the year I spent months saving to buy her a horse-themed dollhouse, each tiny piece wrapped separately, each ribbon tied with care. I worked into the night, imagining her joy as she unwrapped each little gift. But when the day arrived, Vanessa pointed me toward a corner table, far away from the shining mountain of presents. Emily opened mine last, her voice rehearsed, her excitement feigned. "So pretty, Grandma," she said mechanically, already looking toward the backyard where her new bicycle waited. The dollhouse I had sacrificed for was left abandoned, scattered across the table like scraps to be swept into the trash. What broke me wasn't the money. It was the realization that no matter what I gave, it would never be enough. No gift, no effort, no sacrifice would ever buy me a place in their hearts. To them, I wasn't a grandmother, wasn't even a person. I was a resource, a bank account, an extra set of hands when things needed cleaning, a name to sign on documents when they needed approval, a crutch they could lean on, only to kick away once they were steady again. I thought about the vacations. The year Vanessa cornered me with that sickly sweet voice saying, "Emily has never been to the beach." All her friends are going. We don't want her to feel left out. She asked me to pay for the entire trip, $2,500, while I scrubbed office floors at night to make up the loss. And while I worked myself sore, they lounged on a Bahamian beach, posting photos of cocktails and sunsets, never once inviting me, never once considering that I, too, might want to feel the sand under my feet. When they returned, sun-kissed and glowing, David told me with a straight face, "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You're not really a beach person. Not a beach person." As if my exhaustion and sacrifices were preferences. As if I didn't count. It was the same story every holiday, every gathering. I would walk into their home with my arms full of food I had cooked, desserts I had risen at dawn to prepare, gifts wrapped with care. And every time, I watched those offerings sit untouched at the edge of the table while everyone praised the dishes brought by someone else. My food went cold, my containers went home with me, my efforts invisible. When it came time to sit, I always got the chair closest to the kitchen, the uncomfortable one, the one that made it easier for me to serve if asked. And as I sat there, conversations swirled around me, filled with names I didn't know, restaurants I hadn't been invited to, plans I would never be part of. I thought back to one Christmas in particular. I had spent months saving, working overtime, pinching every penny. I wanted it to be special. I wanted desperately to feel like I belonged. I bought expensive wrapping paper, tied each bow with care, wrote heartfelt messages in every card. When the gifts were exchanged, they tore through mine without ceremony, their eyes already fixed on what came next. And when it was my turn, I received a half-used bottle of lotion, wrapped hastily in newspaper. "It didn't work for me, but maybe it'll work for you," Vanessa had said with that sly smile. And like the fool I was, I forced myself to smile, to thank her, to act as though I had been given the world. The memories came like a flood, one after another, each more painful than the last. Every time I had offered love, they had answered with indifference. Every time I had given money, they had answered with entitlement. Every time I had hoped for respect, they had answered with mockery. I realized then that tonight's grape juice wasn't an accident, wasn't a childish prank. It was a culmination. The laughter, the whispers, the way Vanessa's smile lingered even as she cut more cake. This had been orchestrated, deliberate. A public statement of what they had always believed, that I didn't belong, that I was nothing more than an embarrassment, a burden to be tolerated. As I sat in my small apartment later that night, staring at the ruined dress draped over a chair, I finally understood something I had refused to see. I had been complicit. I had allowed this to happen. Every time I said yes to their demands, every time I swallowed my pride and stayed silent, I had taught them how to treat me. I had shown them that they could take and take and take, and I would still be there, ready to give more. But no more. The thought was terrifying, but also liberating. I had spent years trapped by fear, fear of being alone, fear of admitting that my family didn't love me, fear of facing holidays in silence. But that fear had kept me enslaved. Tonight, something had shifted inside me. Tonight, fear had finally given way to anger. And anger, when harnessed, could be powerful. I folded my hands on the kitchen table and stared at the pile of unpaid bills, loan documents, and receipts I had kept tucked away for years. Each one was a record of my sacrifices, proof of the life I had poured into theirs. My heart beat faster as I realized that these papers weren't just reminders of pain. They were weapons. Weapons I had never dared to use before. The grape juice on my dress might never wash out, but perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps it was the scar I needed to remind myself that enough was enough. The time for silence was over. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The events of the night before replayed in my mind not as humiliation, but as revelation. The stain on my dress still hung over the chair like a trophy of disgrace, yet instead of shame, I felt something closer to resolve. It was time. For years, I had been afraid to act, paralyzed by the idea that if I stopped giving, I would lose the last fragments of my family. But in truth, I had already lost them long ago. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened the battered shoebox where I had kept every document, every receipt, every bank statement. The pile was staggering. 6 years' worth of transfers, checks, mortgage payments I had covered. $43,000 in all. not counting the sleepless nights, the aching bones, the quiet tears I had never allowed anyone to see. As I spread the papers across the table, I realized I had built a case without even meaning to. This wasn't just a record of generosity, it was a record of exploitation. At exactly 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the only man I trusted with something this big, Harold Whitman, the attorney who had handled Richard's will. Harold was in his 70s now, but his mind was still sharp as ever. He had seen me through the darkest days of my widowhood, and though we hadn't spoken often in recent years, I knew he was the one person who would understand. "Good morning, Harold," I said when his warm, gravelly voice answered. "This is Martha Caldwell. I need your help with a family matter, an urgent one." There was a pause. Harold had known David since he was a boy. He knew, at least in part, how difficult things had become. "Martha," he said slowly, "what's happened?" I told him. Not everything. Not the grape juice, not the laughter, not the ache in my chest when my granddaughter declared I didn't belong, but the essentials. That I wanted to review the legal implications of withdrawing as cosigner on David and Vanessa's mortgage. That I was finished being the safety net. That I wanted out. Harold's voice grew serious. "Martha, are you sure? If you withdraw, the bank may demand immediate payment of the balance. They could foreclose." "I know," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's exactly what I want. Let them face the consequences of their choices. I've carried this burden long enough." There was another long pause. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Come by my office this afternoon. Bring every document you have, statements, receipts, anything related to the loan. We'll see what can be done." When I hung up, a strange lightness filled me. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The second call I made was to the bank. I asked for Michael Grant, the loan officer who had overseen the Elmwood Avenue mortgage. He knew my voice. I had called too many times to cover missed payments for it to be otherwise. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, sounding almost relieved. "The account is current this month, thanks to your last payment. Is there a problem?" "No problem," I replied evenly. "I need information about the process to withdraw as cosigner." There was silence on the line, the kind that told me I had surprised him. "Withdraw? Mrs. Caldwell, are you certain? If you do, your son and daughter-in-law will need to qualify on their own or find another cosigner. Otherwise, otherwise the bank calls the loan," I finished for him. "Yes, that's what I want. Can you send me the account statement and the forms to initiate withdrawal?" I could almost hear the frown in his voice. "Of course. I'll email you everything by the end of the day." "Thank you," I said simply, and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paper spread across my table. For the first time, they didn't look like burdens. They looked like ammunition. Proof that I had been more than generous. Proof that I had upheld my end of the bargain time, and again, while David and Vanessa squandered every opportunity. That evening, I walked into Harold's office carrying a heavy folder. His office smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, the shelves lined with volumes that had seen decades of cases come and go. He motioned for me to sit, and I placed the folder on his desk. As he flipped through the receipts and statements, his brows rose higher and higher. "My God, Martha, you've carried this for years?" I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "And for what? They don't respect me. They don't even want me around. I've been paying for a house I'm not welcome in, financing kitchens I've never been invited to see, vacations I wasn't allowed to join. Enough is enough." Harold leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Legally, you are within your rights. You can withdraw, but you need to be prepared for the fallout. They will not take this quietly." "I'm prepared," I said, surprising both of us with the conviction in my voice. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll begin the paperwork. And Martha, be ready. When people like David and Vanessa feel cornered, they tend to lash out." I met his eyes across the desk. "They've been lashing out for years. This time, I'll be ready." When I left Harold's office, the autumn air felt crisp and alive against my face. The city lights seemed brighter, the night less heavy. For the first time in decades, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward it. And though I didn't yet know exactly how, I understood this much. The battle had begun. The first call came 3 days later. I was pouring myself a cup of tea when my phone lit up with David's name. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but something inside me knew this was only the beginning. Mom, his voice came through the line, tight and strained. What's this I hear from the bank? You told them you're pulling out as co-signer? Yes, I said simply, my voice calm. I've already filed the paperwork. There was silence, then an explosion. Are you out of your mind? Do you understand what you've done? They're threatening foreclosure. We could lose the house. I took a slow sip of tea, steadying myself. Then perhaps you should pay your mortgage on time, David. Perhaps you should live within your means. His voice cracked, a mix of anger and desperation. This isn't fair. I'm your son. We're family. You don't do this to family. Then Harold called me. My legs trembled as I rose, but my heart beat steady. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat in the witness chair. "Mrs. Caldwell," Harold began gently, "why did you withdraw from the mortgage?" I looked at the judge, at the rows of strangers who now held my story in their hands. Because I had nothing left to give. For years I worked double shifts, emptied my savings, sacrificed my peace, all to keep my son and his family afloat. And in return, I was treated like a burden. I was humiliated in front of strangers, mocked by my own granddaughter, disrespected in my own son's home. I withdrew not out of revenge, but because I finally realized they never wanted me, only my money. My voice shook, but I pressed on. The day my granddaughter threw grape juice on me, and everyone laughed, I understood. I understood that my place in their lives was not as a mother or grandmother. I was an ATM, nothing more. I could not continue. Silence filled the room. Even Judge Thorne looked up from her notes, her eyes softening. Trevino tried to cross-examine me. "Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true this is all because of a childish prank? That you're overreacting?" I met his gaze squarely. "No, sir. This is because I have been exploited for years. Because I paid for kitchens I was never invited to see, vacations I was never allowed to join, mortgages that were not mine. And when I finally said no, they answered with threats and vandalism. I pulled out the photographs, the scratched car, the red paint on my door, the note that said, 'You'll be sorry.' The bailiff passed them to the judge. 'This is not a prank,' I said coldly. 'This is intimidation from my own family.' By the end of the day, Vanessa's mask had cracked. Her polished handkerchief lay shredded in her fist. David sat slumped, sweat beading his forehead. Harold rested his hand lightly on my arm as we gathered our papers. "We've done it, Martha. We've shown the truth." I nodded, my body trembling not from fear, but from release. For the first time in years, the power was no longer in their hands. The courtroom was hushed as Judge Thorne returned from her chambers. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat, each one pulling my heart tighter into my throat. My binder sat closed before me now. Every document, every photograph, every testimony already presented. The fight was no longer in my hands, it was in hers. I clasped my trembling hands together, forcing myself to breathe. Harold leaned closer. "No matter what happens, Martha," he whispered, "you've already won. You stood up for yourself. That can never be taken away." I gave a small nod, though my eyes never left the judge. Judge Thorne sat, adjusted her glasses, and shuffled the stack of papers in front of her. Her face was unreadable, carved from stone. "This court has reviewed all testimony, all evidence, and all exhibits submitted by both parties," she began. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of finality. "The plaintiffs argue that Ms. Martha Caldwell withdrew her co-signature out of spite with malicious intent to destabilize her son's family. They claim emotional harm, financial sabotage, and undue influence. However," she paused, glancing over the rim of her glasses toward David and Vanessa, "the plaintiffs have provided no substantial evidence to support these allegations. Their claims are based on perception, not proof." A faint murmur spread through the benches. Judge Thorne continued, her voice sharpening. "In contrast, the defense has presented compelling evidence of consistent financial support by Ms. Caldwell to the plaintiffs over a period of 6 years. We have documented transfers totaling more than $43,000, payments of mortgage arrears, loans never repaid, and even funding of household renovations and vacations. This establishes not malice, but generosity." Vanessa's knuckles turned white around her handkerchief. David shifted in his chair, sweat glistening on his temple. "Furthermore," the judge went on, "the testimony of multiple witnesses, former colleagues and supervisors of Mr. David Caldwell, has revealed a pattern of fraudulent conduct, financial dishonesty, and deliberate manipulation of his mother. The credibility of these witnesses has not been successfully challenged by the plaintiff's counsel." Trevino, their lawyer, fidgeted in his seat. My chest felt tight, my ears buzzing. Could it be? Could the truth really stand unbroken here, in this room where I had feared being painted as nothing but a bitter old woman? Judge Thorne's gaze fell on me. "This court also acknowledges Miss Caldwell's testimony regarding ongoing harassment, intimidation, and vandalism linked to the plaintiffs. Photographic evidence and police reports substantiate her claims. Such behavior only reinforces the conclusion that her decision to withdraw as co-signer was one of self-protection, not malice. I gripped the edge of the table, every word striking like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then came the words I had prayed for. Accordingly, this court finds that Miss Caldwell acted within her full legal rights in withdrawing her co-signature from the mortgage in question. The lawsuit filed by the plaintiffs is hereby dismissed in its entirety. The air rushed from my lungs. Dismissed. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, her tone turning harder, this court finds the plaintiffs' actions reckless and their lawsuit frivolous. Miss Caldwell has endured undue emotional strain and financial burden in defending herself. Therefore, the plaintiffs are ordered to reimburse the defendant for all legal costs incurred, amounting to $4,500. Vanessa gasped aloud, her composure shattering. David's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched as though he might shatter his teeth. And finally, Judge Thorne concluded, in light of evidence of harassment, this court issues a restraining order against David and Vanessa Caldwell. They are prohibited from contacting or approaching Miss Caldwell or her property for a period of 12 months. Any violation will result in immediate criminal charges. Her gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. Court is adjourned. For a moment I sat frozen. My ears rang. My hands trembled against the wood. I felt Harold's steady hand cover mine. "You did it, Martha," he whispered. "You're free." Free. The words spread inside me, warm and fierce. Free from their demands. Free from the constant fear of being manipulated. Free from the belief that love meant sacrifice without end. As the courtroom emptied, I stood slowly, gathering my binder. Across the aisle, Vanessa was whispering furiously to David, her face twisted in fury. David's shoulders sagged, his eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time, he looked small, not the towering presence that had loomed over my life, but just a man cornered by his own lies. Our eyes met briefly. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something flicker there. Not anger, not hate, but shame. Then he looked away. Outside the courthouse, sunlight bathed the steps. I inhaled deeply, the air crisp and cool against my lungs. Harold stood beside me, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You won more than a case," he said. "You reclaimed your dignity." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. Not of sorrow this time, but of release. I had carried the weight of humiliation for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand tall. Now, with the courthouse doors closing behind me, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The days after the trial passed in a haze of silence. Not the suffocating silence that had haunted me in David's house, not the silence of humiliation at family gatherings, but a gentler kind. A silence of peace. For the first time in years, the phone no longer rang with demands. No letters arrived with threats. My door, once vandalized with red paint, now bore only the soft green wreath I had hung in spring. I was no longer waiting for the next insult, the next blow. I was free. At first, freedom felt strange. I woke each morning expecting the weight of dread to settle on my chest. But instead, the sunlight slipped through my curtains like a gentle hand. I brewed coffee without rushing, read the newspaper without glancing at the clock, and walked through the park without fear of confrontation. It was in those quiet walks that I began to imagine something new. Not survival, not endurance, but life. One afternoon, as I passed the little corner cafe where I'd first met Clara, I stopped to watch the steady stream of people moving in and out, students with laptops, mothers with strollers, older men playing chess by the window. Laughter spilled out with the aroma of fresh coffee, and then a thought came to me, so sudden it made me pause. What if I created a place like this? A place of warmth, of belonging. Not for them, not for David or Vanessa, but for me and for anyone who needed it. The idea took root quickly. I had savings again, small but steady. I had time. Most importantly, I had a desire that had lain dormant for years, the desire to build something that was mine, not stolen by obligation. Within weeks, I was visiting vacant storefronts with a leasing agent. There was one that caught my heart immediately, an old brick building with tall windows, worn floors, and sunlight that pooled in golden squares across the walls. The rent was modest. The location was near the park. I signed the lease that very afternoon. The name came to me that night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Second Chance's Cafe. Because that was what this was, my second chance. The following months were a blur of paint swatches, furniture shopping, and long nights scrubbing decades of dust from the floorboards. Clara joined me often, rolling up her sleeves and laughing as we fumbled with shelves and mismatched chairs. Dorothy Miller from church brought flowers to brighten the windowsills. Even Officer Daniels stopped by, offering to help patch the front door. I was no longer alone. Piece by piece, a community gathered around me, not bound by blood, but by kindness, by shared hands lifting me when I stumbled. The day the cafe opened, I stood behind the counter in a crisp white apron, my heart thudding. The bell above the door jingled, and customers trickled in. Curious neighbors, old friends, strangers drawn by the scent of coffee and the promise of something new. "Welcome to Second Chances," I said, my voice trembling but proud. By noon, the place was full. Clara read stories to children at a corner table. Two teenagers practiced guitar near the window. Dorothy arranged fresh flowers by the register. And as I poured coffee for a young mother, I realized my cafe wasn't just a business. It was a haven I had built with my own two hands. In the weeks that followed, I found joy in the rhythm of it, the hiss of the espresso machine, the laughter of patrons, the quiet hum of conversation. I decorated the walls with photographs of sunrises and handwritten quotes about resilience. I baked muffins at dawn, brewed tea in the afternoons, and listened to the stories of those who walked through my door. Every day, I saw pieces of myself reflected in them. The woman starting over after divorce, the retired teacher seeking purpose, the teenager dreaming of escape, and I knew I had created something that mattered. David never came. Vanessa never came. Emily never came. At first, that absence ached like a wound, but over time, I understood it differently. Their absence was not loss, it was space. Space for new beginnings, space for people who chose to be part of my life rather than demanded it. And perhaps one day, Emily would grow older, see the truth for herself, and walk through my door. If she did, I would be waiting. But until then, I would not live in hope of what could be. I would live in what was. One evening, as the cafe closed and the last customer drifted out, Clara lingered by the counter. "You know, Martha," she said softly, "you're happier now than I've ever seen you." I smiled, wiping down the counter. "That's because I finally learned something." "And what's that?" she asked. "That love without respect isn't love, and that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who walk into your life when you need them most." That night, as I turned off the cafe lights and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt it deep in my bones. I had not been destroyed. I had been reborn. The trial had stripped away everything false, everything rotten. In its place, I had found truth, strength, and a community that lifted me higher than I ever thought I could stand. I locked the door behind me, the sign in the window glowing softly, Second Chances Cafe. And for the first time in decades, I walked home, not as a woman burdened by loss, but as a woman who had finally beautifully found herself.